I will call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. First order of business is approval of today's agenda, which is on the screen. Do any members of the committee want to have suggest any changes to the agenda for today? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next order of business is approval of our February 3rd Technical Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Joe, if you could click on the link and bring those up on the screen. Do committee members have any questions on this item? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Melissa will second.
Alyssa moved the item. Was there a second?
I think Brian moved and Alyssa seconded.
Okay, sorry. You know what, you guys? WebEx's volume is really not awesome on my computer. Sorry, I just turned it up. Okay, so we have a first and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye by roll call. Joe?
Anoka County, McPherson. Or somebody. Carver County, Robjent. Dakota County, Labrie. Oh. Hennepin County, Ellos.
Aye.
Ramsey County, Isaacson.
Aye.
Scott County, Freeze.
Well, it's Craig Jensen.
Okay.
Aye.
Washington County, Leitner.
Aye.
7W, Witter.
Aye.
Tab, Kotsukos.
Aye.
MTS, Peterson, Steve, or else Cole might be.
Yeah, this is Cole. Aye.
Metropolitan Council Community Development, Boylan. He's not here, I guess, but for FYI, Patrick Boylan will be taking that seat from Michael Larson, who has left the council. Metro Transit, Harrington. MnDOT Metro, Tag. MPCA, Swanson, sorry, Annika Swanson.
Yeah, Nika Swanson. Aye.
Okay, Mac, Reef.
Aye.
Suburban Transit, Fighton.
Aye.
MnDOT Freight, Shelley Meyer.
Aye.
Deed, Eddie.
I just one thing, I'm unchecked there, but I was at that meeting.
Oh. Folks are content. I'll just check it for the final, but I don't know if people feel an action is needed, but we're halfway through. I'll put you on there. Bicycle, Sabota.
Aye.
Pedestrian, Turner Bargain. Bloomington, Keel.
Aye.
Chanhassen, Howley.
Aye.
Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Eden Prairie, Ellis.
Aye.
Kozlucher, Frilly, Kozlucher.
Aye.
Brooklyn Park, Ruiz.
Aye.
Plymouth, Thompson.
Aye.
Woodbury, Hartzell.
Aye.
Minneapolis Engineering, Hager.
Aye.
Minneapolis Planning, Mail.
This is Kelsey Fote standing in for Kathleen Mayo, and aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Nick Peterson.
Aye.
And Planning, Dermody. That's 24 ayes, which is a quorum. Get a slow start there, but
Joe McPherson did vote in the chat with an aye, so he is here and accounted for.
thank you.
Okay, so That motion passes. And is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to the committee today? Seeing none, we will move to committee reports. So executive committee did meet this morning. Just a couple of quick updates before we move into the streamlined tip amendments. Thank you to everyone who has volunteered so far to participate on the Regional Solicitation Technical Steering Committee. I think Steve Peterson's going to be reaching out. We had more volunteers than what we needed on that committee, so we're going to be working to pare that down a bit and making sure that we have representation across cities, counties, and organizations, as well as geographic representation on that committee. So watch for some further communication on that. And then just please note that the steering committee is just one committee and the work will continue with work groups that will be defined at a later point in time. So everyone will have an opportunity to get engaged in this very important work. And then maybe just a quick heads up that scoring for the current regional solicitation is happening now, as most of you know, because you're participating in that work. And so very soon we will start to see some information coming through the committees leading up to decisions around funding scenarios. And so the executive committee did not get a chance to talk in detail this morning about our upcoming schedule and plans for that, but I do anticipate that we will call some meetings to be held in person with this important work, because some of those conversations are better facilitated and held in person than in a virtual format. So if anyone has any questions or concerns about that, feel free to reach out to myself or Elaine or Joe. With that, otherwise watch for more information on that in the near future. And I see Elaine has her hand up. We'll go to Elaine before we move to the 2 action items. Go ahead, Elaine.
I was wondering if you want my tab report.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Yep, thank you, Elaine. Go ahead with the tab report.
Yeah. I'll try and make it brief here. So tab met February 21st. Chair Hovland welcomed new tab member Kevin Burkhardt. He's from Prior Lake, appointed by Metro Cities to fill the position vacated by Janet Williams, who is from Savage. And Hovland reported on the executive committee meeting. Mark Windshuttle was selected the first vice chair, and Debbie Gattell was selected second vice chair for 2024. And Peter Dugan was reappointed for the tab liaison position to the Met Council's Transportation Committee. And then going forward in June, the June tab meeting falls on the 19th, which is a Juneteenth holiday. So tab has rescheduled its meeting for June 12th if that meeting is needed. For MnDOT report, Connie Siebjim reported that Duluth received $1 billion for the $1.8 billion Blatnick Bridge project. For the MPCA, Frank Kolash reported that the MPCA is near completion on the Priority Climate Action Plan, and that plan is due March 1st. And for the MAC report, Carl Crimmins reported that, again, MSP passenger traffic is increasing, and then the FAA will be holding public workshops this summer on new airplane departure procedures. And their website has the link to go to those workshops, and they want to start the new procedures in 2025. Metropolitan Council, Deb Barber reported on 2 recent presentations at the Transportation Committee, the 2023 year-end ridership report, and then the latest Safety and Security Action Plan quarterly update. The Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that ridership is continuing to grow, with a lot of the increase on the microtransit services. And then Southwest Transit has hired a new director of operations with Stephanie Alexander, who had been a former tab alternate for transit. And then for the action items, they approved the streamlined tip amendment that came through TAC on the 3 project adjustments. They approved the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport long-term comprehensive plan. There's a lot of discussion on that. They approved the scope change request for St. Louis Park, Cedar Lake Road, and Louisiana improvement projects. This came through TAC in January. And they did approve the scope change with no reduction in the federal funds, same as TAC had approved. They approved 2 program year extensions, one for Oakdale's Greenway project and Anoka County's 44th Avenue Bridge Bike Pedestrian Trail project, and the scope change request for MnDOT Trunk Highway 65 bump out and bikeway project. And there had been a scheduled presentation on regional transportation finance, but that was tabled for lack of time in the meeting, and that's been rescheduled for April 17th TAB meeting. And that's my report.
Thank you, Elaine. Sorry about that. Anybody
That's
have
okay.
questions for Elaine on the tab report? I would encourage you all on that April 17th meeting, and Amy's presentation on transportation finance, I think, is going to be very informative. So if you can't watch it live, check out the recording later. Okay. Seeing no questions from committee members, and we've already done the executive committee report, then I will turn it over to Robbie King to walk us through the 2 streamlined tip amendment action items that we have on our agenda today. Go ahead, Robbie.
Thank you, Chair. Members, good morning. First, streamlined tip amendment is a tip amendment to the 24-27 tip. It's MnDOT's Robert Street project. It's a jurisdictional transfer to the city of St. Paul and a cost increase. Additionally, they're moving the project from 2025 to 2024. MnDOT requests the amendment, and the recommended motion is that the technical advisory recommend adoption of the amendment to the 2024-2027 tip to increase the project cost of MnDOT's Robert Street project and reassign the project to the city of St. Paul. And I will stand for questions.
Motion to approve.
Seconded. This is Cole.
Okay, so we have a first and a second, Brian and Cole, is that correct?
Mhm.
Any further discussion from committee members on this item or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Joe?
McPherson,
Aye.
any Carver County,
Yep, Linden, aye.
any Dakota County?
Yep, aye.
Was that Aaron?
Yes, Aaron.
Okay. Ellos,
Aye.
Isaacson,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Leitner,
Aye.
Witter,
Aye.
Kotsukos,
Aye.
Hideker,
Aye.
Boylan, were you here? Anybody from Metro Transit? Tag?
Aye.
Swanson, sorry.
Abstain.
Reef,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Eddie,
Aye.
Sabota,
Aye.
Keel,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Omi,
Aye.
Ellis,
Aye.
Lucher,
Aye.
Ruiz,
Aye.
Thompson,
Aye.
Herzl,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Vogt,
Aye.
Nick Peterson.
Aye.
And anybody from St. Paul Planning, Germany? Okay. Chair, the
Okay.
ayes seem to have it.
That item carries, and moving on to 2024-14. Robbie?
Thank you, Chair. All right, so this second Streamlined tip amendment request is 3 new projects. These are 3 MnDOT projects. The first project is to install new median cable barriers on Minnesota Highway 5 between Century Boulevard to Market Boulevard, City Road 101, and from Minnesota 101 to Heritage Road in Chanhassen. The project is 3.9 miles, and the total cost is $2.4 million. It's 100% state funded. Second project, MnDOT requests adding a new project to replace signal cabinets across MnDOT's Metro District. The project's proposed funds are HSIP funds programmed by MnDOT, 90% of the $3 million project cost, coming from FHWA and 10% from state funds. The third project is MnDOT requests adding a new project to replace lighting at various locations on Interstate 494 and Minnesota Highway 52. There is an error in the action transmittal. The project's proposed funds are HSIP funds programmed by MnDOT, 90% of the $400,000 project cost coming from FHWA and 10% from state funds. None of these projects are regional solicitation funds. The recommended motion is that the Technical Advisory Committee recommend adoption of an amendment to the 2024-2027 TIP to add 3 new MnDOT projects that I just listed.
Great, thank you. Any questions on this item? Or anyone who would like to move it?
Madam Chair, this is Joe with Anoka County. I'll make a motion to move it.
Thank you, Joe. Is there a second?
This is Keel in Bloomington. I'd second.
Thank you, Carl. We have a first and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye, Joe.
McPherson,
Aye.
Robjent,
Aye.
Labrie,
Aye.
Ellos. Ellos. Isaacson,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Leitner,
Aye.
Witter,
Aye.
Kotsukos,
Aye.
Peterson. Or I'm sorry, Hineker.
Aye.
Tag.
Aye.
Swanson,
Abstain.
Reef,
Aye.
Fighton,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Eddie.
Aye.
Sabota,
Aye.
Keel,
Aye.
Howley,
Aye.
Omi,
Aye.
Alice,
Aye.
Oslucher, Ruiz,
Aye.
Thompson,
Aye.
Herzl,
Aye.
Hager,
Aye.
Vogt,
Aye.
Nick Peterson.
Aye.
The ayes seem to have it.
Great, thank you. That item carries forward, and that concludes the items from Executive Committee this month. Gina, are there any updates from the Planning Committee?
Chair Hager, the Planning Committee did not meet, though the Transportation Policy Plan Technical Work Group did. So if you wanted, I could give a brief update on that.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Like I said, TAC planning did not meet in February, but we will be meeting in March. And the item to consider in March is the adoption of the new greenhouse gas emissions performance measure. So we will discuss that this month. And then again, to the TPP technical work group, we did meet in February. We heard a summary of comments that we had received on 3 chapters for transit, freight, and aviation. And then staff also presented a summary of the chapters that we're currently reviewing now, which are the goals chapters and policies and actions. Staff is receiving comments on all of the items, including the new chapters and previously reviewed chapters through tomorrow, March 7th. And I just want to note that they have received very few comments on the most recent chapters, the policies, the goals, policies and actions. So if anyone is waiting on submitting those, please do so today or by tomorrow. In March, we will, looking ahead to March, we will discuss the comments hopefully received by tomorrow on the goals, chapters, and actions. We'll hear a summary of the work plan chapter and discuss the progress and updates on the land use policy plan. And that's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Gina. I see Lissa has her hand up. Go ahead, Lissa.
Gina, can you just clarify the TAC planning is voting on the targets or performance measures? I can't remember the word you just used, related to our next information item here, or is it a separate target than that?
Chair Hager and Lissa, I have not previewed this with staff, so I might ask them to clarify. It is performance measures, the note that I got from Jed. And I don't know if Dave Berrens is on the call or if somebody else knows, but he was the staff contact in my notes about that.
I can just chime in. This is Cole. We under federal law, there's a requirement for a performance measure for greenhouse gas emissions. It's a short-term performance measure similar to the other ones that we've adopted previously for safety and other topics that have federal performance measures. It is not directly tied to the GHG emissions mitigation working group. It's a federal requirement. And it came about fairly quickly, the rulemaking from the feds. So we are, just to give you a preview, we are supporting MnDOT's target setting process for this statewide. But it's not directly tied to that, but I think, Lissa, there's a long-term vision that we have to make those two in concert. This came kind of quick, and it's a requirement that has a deadline. So does that help?
Yeah, I just knowing how much, and obviously we're going to hear a lot more about it here momentarily, but I just making sure that it's abundantly clear how those things are tied and not tied, knowing that this working group has an ongoing effort. And so I just don't want to box folks into voting on a performance target that potentially would dictate an outcome of this working group. So I think clarification on any of that would be very helpful for our staff, at least.
Great. Thank you, Lissa and Cole and Gina. Are there any other questions for Gina on the report back? Okay, seeing none, then I will turn it over to Michael to see if there's any report from funding and programming.
Thank you, Chair Hager. Similar to planning, we actually did not meet, and so not much of an update here, but I will be reaching out to some of our city members just regarding steering committee for the regional solicitation. I know you mentioned that a little bit earlier. And I will be out this month during our F&P meeting. So Carl Keel will be chairing in my place. So that's all I have.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Carl, for taking that on. Any questions of Michael on that report? Seeing none, then we will move to our information items. And so first up is Chris Berrens and former TAC Chair John Solberg to give us a presentation on the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Impact Mitigation Working Group report.
Thank you, Chair Hager. I'm going to introduce things today, and then we'll turn it over to Chris. And for those of you that don't know me, yes, John Solberg. I'm with the Department of Transportation, Assistant Division Director for Sustainability Planning and Program Management. And Chris Berrens is the manager for our Greenhouse Gas Emissions Impact Mitigation Work Group. And again, we'll be presenting the details on this, but so I'll start with, this is the work group was the result of legislation that passed last May in the Minnesota legislature, which effectively required the Department of Transportation to conduct an assessment of greenhouse gas VMT on projects that would expand the system. An expansion was generally defined as adding a lane more than 2,500 feet in length and effectively new interchanges. And so for the last 7 months, as you can see here on this slide, as organized by the legislature, these folks have been helping the department to determine what that process looks like, what are the metrics that we might be able to bring into the process, what are the tools that we can use. And so you can see we have several partners from TAC right here. Lyndon and Joe were part of that process, and Charles Carlson, of course, from the council was part of that process as well. Couple things just for folks to be thinking about as we move through this. Again, that work group was really working on how do we do this? How do we move forward? What are the things we need to consider? And ultimately put together a report which was submitted back to the legislature on February 1st of this year for recommendations on how to improve the implementation of this process. And all throughout the process, not only do you have that issue of just trying to figure out the implementation, we did get into some of these larger questions about, well, if we're evaluating greenhouse gas and VMT, let's talk about what some of these connections are to transportation. How does land use and land use types, how do they affect the transportation system? What are the trade-offs in mitigation or an offset for greenhouse gas or VMT in a project? And really, so there's still a lot of, shall I say, questions out there on this particular process, but hopefully folks will see this work group really did a lot of work and provided a lot of a good basis for the framework for this evaluation. And I should remind folks that this evaluation on expansion projects is really required to be in place by February 1st of 2025. So effectively at this point, we have 11 months to figure out the rest of the process on the evaluation, not to mention some of the other components that will need to go along with that, which is really that kind of sub-allocation of greenhouse gas and VMT throughout the state, so that folks have a better idea of the targets that they're hitting. And maybe to Lissa's comment earlier, that target on GHG will be talked about is really based on the statewide targets that came out of STAC, and it was manipulated to fit the federal target, but it does give the state an opportunity to relook at those targets, and that will be part of the process coming up in the next several months. So brief overview there. Hopefully with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to go through some more of the details on what that work group went through. And of course, Lyndon and Joe are here as well and can chime in if we miss anything. Thanks. Chris?
Thanks, John. Lisa, did you have a question? See a hand up.
Just didn't put my hand down.
All right, thanks. What we wanted to do is just kind of share a little bit of how things have been developing, and in particular, the work group's deliberations to date and kind of where this is going through 2024. And just as a reminder, we've got this connection here, and the legislature passed new requirements across just about every sector for addressing emissions in across sectors. And there was a lot of interest in what could be done in the transportation sector, since it is the largest contributor in the state. And there was particular attention around what can be done at the intersection of transportation decision-making and how the emissions and VMT trends kind of interact with each other. The targets that are the emissions target that's established in state statute sets out a net zero reduction by 2050. And then Minnesota DOT has a VMT per capita reduction target to get to 20% per capita reduction by 2050. Looking out to 2030, we have a 8% per capita reduction target. And so there's obviously a gap, and I think the legislature identified, how are you gonna close this gap? And they passed a couple of pieces of legislation in the omnibus bill that kind of interact with each other. We've mentioned that work group just a moment ago that was established to kind of assist and help with this overall process. They've been meeting every other week for the last many months and just shared their report with the legislature a few weeks ago. The two key requirements, though, were Section 28 establishes this requirement for a assessment to take place before a project enters a STIP or TIP, and to evaluate the emissions and VMT impact from that build, no build scenario, whether it's led by MnDOT or by locals. And then what needs to happen is a determination of conformance with those targets. And if the project is out of conformance, it would need to mitigate or offset those emissions. And the evaluation time period, just to note, is a 20-year period, kind of a pretty common reference point for transportation decision-making. But the other key requirement was to take that sector emissions target and suballocate it across the state. And I'll touch upon that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, just chime in, raise your hand, or just talk over me. We have, over the next year here, a couple of key milestones that we're seeing. Back in the fall, we were doing some initial stakeholder outreach across the state, asking about kind of people's initial thoughts. And we had a lot of that also with that work group that John mentioned. I'm going to share a little bit about what that work group communicated back to the legislature. And now, as we look into the spring period, the legislature could take some additional action, which they've voiced some interest in engaging with some of the work group's recommendations. And we're also looking to set up the scenarios for us to evaluate in the summertime to respond to that Section 64 that I mentioned. And so we're kind of just out letting folks know kind of how we're going to be working through that. And then in the summer period, that third round of public and stakeholder outreach will involve us reviewing feasibility around those scenarios for Section 64 and talking about the planned assessment approach for capacity expansion projects. These two requirements are going to follow a little bit different timelines because though they both need to be in place by February 1st of next year, we need to get that assessment out the door by the end of the summer so that folks planning their projects have kind of enough runway to integrate the process into those projects. But we do anticipate that for the suballocation of emissions reduction, discussion is going to go more into the fall time timeframe. There was also a question about the federal measure, and I think Cole hit on it well. There is this new federal requirement that all states submit a emissions reduction goal, and there's not really any direct changing of funds or additional action beyond that. Right now, they're just looking for states to identify an emissions reduction target and that it needs to be reducing. Again, as Cole had mentioned, we see the state requirements that Minnesota has are kind of much more connected to points of accountability than the federal requirements. So what we will likely do is update that and what was just submitted to FHWA on October 1st when the performance requirements are needed to be submitted. It's a little bit of inside information, but that's kind of, there's an opportunity for us to update and revise those targets. And we as a state may or may not do that based on kind of the conversation that takes place. I'm going to drop into the chat here. I mentioned the work group's report. As you can imagine, when this group started meeting, there was a lot of questions that came up. One of the areas that is a significant topic of discussion was the intersection of land use and transportation, and how the decisions that are being made on our projects influence land use and how to evaluate changes in land use. Our modeling strategies look to get at that a little bit, but there's also, we know some things that are missed. And folks also identified the importance to have kind of a standard and clear process, but also be able to iterate on that as we have new information, new modeling tools that are being developed, especially around carbon emissions. We see new ones coming out every few months. And so there's actually there's a lot out there, but there's also a lot needed to sort of bake this into our process. I'm not going to touch upon all of the work group's recommendations. The report itself is actually fairly short, and the executive summary covers kind of the key points. But one thing that I would like to touch upon is that basically all of the work group members agreed that it would be beneficial for Minnesota to have a evaluation strategy that was taking place at a regional level, at an MPO level, and capacity expansion projects to be evaluated in that broader suite of investments. We do not have all of the tools and capabilities to do that type of planning and modeling across regions and across jurisdictions. And so right now, what the work group developed was a maturity strategy for implementing this legislation, in particular, this assessment requirement. And first and foremost, to develop an approach that allows you to evaluate projects and then over time matures into an ability to evaluate projects in the context of a plan or program of projects. I'm going to stop for a moment and see if there's any questions on this, or and also just to highlight the work group's contributions and the report itself.
I'm not seeing any hands, Chris, but I'll just note for the committee members, if you don't have the chat box open, there are some links and additional information being put into the chat as the presentation flows. So I'll keep an eye up on the chat for any hands up, Chris.
Great. So as I mentioned, what we're focused on right now is developing an approach for doing this evaluation at a project level to meet that deadline, and then communicating with the work group. I know also the counties have been working with some of the authors of this bill to talk a little bit about how to build capacity for evaluation of emissions on a regional level. All right, this is pretty. There's some abstract aspects of this, but maybe what would be helpful is just give people kind of an example of what is sort of being asked of us to do. And you could think of sort of a recent project that we have on Interstate 94 from Albertville to Monticello. You have a 4 to 6 lane expansion. A project like that would need to go through this assessment process and would need to evaluate the added emissions and the added VMT and identify those impacts before the project enters the STIP or TIP. If it is determined that building that project is going to increase emissions in VMT, then that would need to be mitigated and also programmed as a project enters the STIP or TIP. I will note one thing that is key for this process is to identify an approach for evaluating projects while also knowing that a preferred alternative is not going to be picked until a couple of years later potentially. And so what we have been doing is trying to set up a process that is both accountable at the time that legislation identifies, but also flexible enough to deal with the fact that projects go through more refined design, and what is actually needed to be mitigated is going to be probably revisited after a preferred alternative is selected. So a lot of work both with the discussions with the work group, and then also MnDOT has an internal project team that is working on some of these key kind of policy and technical questions. And I'm setting up a draft procedure process to share with folks by June. I keep mentioning this word around mitigation or offset. The legislation does identify 9 areas that constitute a mitigating activity. And we have some work that's going on in another area around carbon reduction that is looking to evaluate most of these areas. And we've already created kind of a methodology for analysis of how much emissions reduction can be achieved with some of these different types of investments and in different areas. Also of note around the mitigation, one of the things when the legislators were putting this together, folks were asking, well, what if I can't mitigate within my community? There was this preference and desire for mitigation to happen within a community, but there's going to be times where the emissions and VMT impacts cannot be mitigated and offset within that community. And the legislation identifies first it should be mitigated in the community. If it can't be there, areas of disadvantage within that region and then within that state. Yeah, there's a question.
Hey, Chris, thanks for the presentation. I'm curious, does the legislation speak to who is obliged for the mitigation?
Who's on the hook?
Yeah.
Well, it says the applicable entity.
I'm saying it's all the legislation is on a state highway at this moment, right?
Yes, whether on a state highway, whether it is led by MnDOT or by a local government.
Right.
Yep.
So that means John writes a personal check, or?
Well, one of the things that we're really trying to do is set up a process that is that the point is to have accountability for that impact, but also we need to set up a process that is administratively feasible. And we've talked at length within the work group about the parallels with wetland mitigation and wetland banking. And we're looking to draw a lot of best practices from that approach in order to kind of meet both these needs to have the program move and also be accountable for our impacts. Yes, Steve.
I want to get back to opening John's checkbook a little bit here, but no, just kidding. My question, since this legislation was written, MnDOT completed the state's carbon reduction strategy, and that lists all sorts of eligible project types for that funding source. And I just wonder how you've been thinking about bringing that carbon reduction strategy. One of them, intersection improvements was one of them, probably more like the roundabout type projects. And as County X or City Y is proposing a project, that's something they have more kind of direct kind of impact over, because that's the types of projects they would be delivering from that agency perspective. So I just wonder if this list, if you thought about expanding this list to more of the eligible project types from the carbon reduction strategy, and how that might get into the legislation, because it has to be specifically listed, I imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, so two thoughts on that. It's a really good point. So Steve, for those that aren't familiar, Steve's referencing the carbon reduction strategy that every state is doing as a part of the IIJA bill. And one of the things that we have done through that process is to identify investment types that reduce emissions, and then apply a methodology for analyzing that in different contexts. And it aligns a fair amount with the list that you see here. And, I think your roundabout example kind of fits under number 8 there, Steve. But we need to kind of develop a process for evaluation similar to what we have with the crash reduction factors. This was modeled after some work that a couple of states have done in this area, where you basically, if I build X, what does the research say? What's the impact this has on emissions reduction when I kind of normalize it over a 20-year period? And so what we'll likely end up doing is having this list, and then having the quantification of its benefits, and then revising that as research comes out. Again, just like the crash reduction factors. Does that help?
Yep. That makes sense. And maybe, Madam Chair, if I just might add, the people that were on the work group from, I guess, Joe and Lyndon and Charles Carlson from our staff, do want to thank them for their efforts. I mean, I was trying to keep track of this work group, and it was meeting every 2 weeks for 2 or 3 hours. It was a tough topic that we haven't waded into. And so between Chris and John and all the members of the work group, they put a lot of time in trying to figure this out. So thanks to all involved here.
Yeah, I want to second that. The group was really great. There was a lot of thoughtful discussion for those that kind of listened in. The representatives really kind of sunk their teeth into this, and were thinking about these questions in depth.
See, Bill has his hand up. Go ahead, Bill.
Thanks. I don't know if this is the best time to ask this question, but I see from the report that induced demand is taken into account to some degree, but also that more study is needed to figure out exactly how to calculate that. Could you explain how induced demand is being taken into account at this point, and what the time frame is that you're looking at? Is it the first 1 year? Is it the first 5 years, first 10 years?
Well, I think, as it relates to metro area projects, somebody like Jonathan Ehrlich would be more of an expert to kind of unpack this. He has actually a really great slide deck on this. The short answer is that our traffic modeling and forecasting accounts for a number of aspects, but misses out on a couple of key ones, in particular, how transportation investments might change land use and induce more travel. It's just we're asking our models to weigh in on questions in a way that they weren't really initially intended to do. And so there's a lot of states that have been looking at, I shouldn't say a lot of states, there's a number of states that have been looking at how to complement or supplement their traffic forecasting methods to better account for those impacts from that intersection of transportation and land use decisions. And California has been doing a lot of work in this space for over a decade now. We also know that Massachusetts is integrating the inducement effects directly into their process much more explicitly. This is Bill, you're asking a really key question here that we're wrestling with. I think we are going to try to take prudent steps in integrating these requirements, and also recognize that there's aspects that we don't know yet. Yeah, Joe, we talked about this a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You did a nice job summarizing all this. It's a lot to unpack in a 2-hour meeting here. But with that, to Bill's question there, one of the other recommendations that the working group had was to form this executive committee. And it's going to be made up of technical experts in various different fields, whether it's traffic modeling, it's diving a little deeper into greenhouse gas analysis and the different programs and tools that are available now. And as we kick off here, as Chris alluded to, we're going to be using the tools that are available to us, the best options we have now, but it's going to progress over time. And the intent of that executive committee is going to be to explore new tools, new technologies as they come out. And then as they develop, they'll report back to our friends at the DOT and probably ultimately legislature, depending on how the session goes and what legislation's produced on this. And hopefully that executive committee element gets included in the legislation, but yet to be seen. But again, I just wanted to emphasize what Chris was saying there, that some tools haven't been developed yet or are in the works. And especially when you're talking about induced demand, that one there is a big topic. We did spend a lot of time on it, but more to come as we move forward on that. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that you all are taking such a serious look at that. So thanks for the update.
Yeah, to just double click on what Joe said, if you want to look in the report, it's the recommendation to establish a technical oversight committee, a non-political review body to help both with near-term and medium-term questions related to implementation of this of these requirements. I know we're probably getting shorter on time. I do want to touch upon the Section 64 allocation of the transportation sector target. The requirements are for, there's a number of them that are sort of in place right now, but I want to highlight item 3 there, this allocation or sub-allocation for the transportation sector says that we need to provide an allocation for the metro area and also conduct a feasibility assessment of emissions reduction across forms of land use and across regions of the state. And then also may include performance targets at a district level, per capita calculation. We've done a fair amount of review on this question. How do we think about this target as it stands for the transportation sector in Minnesota, and then sub-allocate it? And there are a number of states that are using a tool called Vision Eval, which is an open source modeling tool that is now kind of being federally supported to allow folks to do some evaluation at the intersection of travel behavior and land use changes. And I mentioned that our Minnesota's legislation came from some work that was happening in some other states, most notably Colorado and Oregon. They both kind of used this methodology to unpack their target and look at kind of subsector target questions more thoughtfully and planfully. We did a little bit of this with the Pathways report and some of the work that went into the Minnesota's climate action framework, but we're being asked to sort of unpack this even further. Steve also mentioned we're going to be able to draw from some of the work that was just adopted in the carbon reduction strategy, but to kind of bring this back, this is just an example of how Oregon has thought through some of these questions around what's feasible for emissions reduction when you look at different parts of a state, and how can you look at different scenarios, different outcomes, and have a thoughtful discussion about that. To just wrap things up, I want to bring it back to that implementation timeline and any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, John, and thank you, Lyndon and Joe, for serving on the work group. Anyone on the committee have further questions or comments they'd like to make? Okay, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I was just going to give a quick shout out to MnDOT for facilitating this process. It was a pretty wide-ranging group. This was kind of mentioned before, but thinking about that, that list of stakeholders and the topic at hand, MnDOT really did a great job having really productive, effective, and informed conversations. So many thanks to Chris and the broader MnDOT team for leading this process.
Thanks, Charles.
Okay, seeing no other hands up, we'll end this item, and thank you, Chris. Thank you, John, again. There are the presentation and the actual work group report are linked to our agenda for today online. So if you haven't taken a look at that, please do.
Thank you, Chair. And just, if anybody has any questions that come up or you're thinking about this as your project selection process goes forward, by all means, give Chris or myself a call or an email. We're happy to have the discussion because there is a lot of questions on this topic.
Yeah, to just piggyback on the, I'm sorry, Chair Hager.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say that as we, wanted to highlight that timeline, as we get closer to kind of some of these key deliverables, you'll see the milestones at the top there. We're looking to have a draft assessment approach out at the beginning of the summer, or early part of the summer, I'm going to say. And then have a conversation about that and publish a final version at the end of the summer. We would be happy to kind of come and talk about that as it starts to take more explicit shape. We're working on a procedures process, and we also want to talk about some of those options that are inevitably on the table in the policy considerations. So that could be something of note for this group. If they would want to hear more about that, we'd be happy to share.
Great. I'm sure there will be interest from the group, so thank you for that offer. Okay, thank you again. And so we will move on to our next information item now, which is Cole and Bethany giving us an update on the 2050 TPP policies and actions. I'm not sure which one is leading, Bethany or Cole.
I'll take the start, share the presentation here. Is that sharing?
Not yet, Cole.
Oh, didn't hit the button. How about now?
It's coming up. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go back to the beginning here. So yeah, we gave a transportation policy plan update last month, but I wanted to dive into a little bit more detail as we're going to start sharing documents with TAC. Things that have already been shared with the technical working group, but expanding it to a broader audience. So as Gina had alluded to, we've been reviewing chapters at the technical working group over the last few months. There's 6 that are currently being reviewed with comments due this Thursday. And then next week, we'll be reviewing a new document with the work program. So focusing on those 6 that we're reviewing right now, because we're going to be sharing those with broader audiences starting later this month. So I added this slide up front again, just as a reminder as to what the plan is. And we've tweaked it a little bit. We have the goals chapters ready to be shared with other stakeholders after the technical working group. We're not going to make any edits in response to the technical working group feedback, but we're just going to share it with the broader audience. And so that includes TAC. So this is maybe a heads up for you all. After the TAB meeting on the 20th, we're going to share 6 documents with you all. And while you're certainly welcome to look at all of the 6 documents, time constraints recognized, we really think the technical advisory committee is probably more suited to look at the policies and actions, because it's a little bit more in the weeds and the more detail. And we expect TAB and Met Council members might spend more time looking at the goals documents. So today we wanted to give you an overview of the policies and actions as the technical committee. We're going to give a brief overview on TAB on the 20th on the kind of the document structures, but we're not going to give this detailed technical policies and actions overview. So just a note that that's what's coming, and you'll have a request to review those documents later this month. So again, today we're just going to focus on policies and actions in a little bit more detail than we've gone into in the past with you all, but we're going to start with Bethany going over the process because she led the development of this, and then we'll kind of tag team the actual overview. So Bethany.
Thank you, Cole and Chair and members. So I think we've been in front of you all quite a bit about the policy development process, but we started this back in 2022, where we realigned what we had for the 2040 TPP to align with the new shared structure that all of the different policy plans are going to be using within the regional development guide. And we organized around the 5 new regional goals. In 2023, the TPP Technical Working Group provided some feedback on what we had, any new gaps, opportunities, and redundancy. And then we took that feedback and we stood up 8 policy development teams, and those teams were made up of experts from across the region. And we'll show a little bit more on the next slide of those. And they were really the functional teams that provided us the expertise and the guidance to write the policies and actions that will be shared with you based on the regional goals and the transportation specific objectives. Last November, we held 3 workshops to review the policies and actions that were developed. We took that feedback, the policy teams reviewed it and made their final recommendation. And that document was shared with the technical working group in February. And in addition to the technical review of the policies and actions, we did hire an equity engagement consultant to further review our work with community-based organizations, parks, libraries, and other sort of agencies who work in the space but aren't necessarily involved in our processes. And we'll continue to refine all of that work until we get to adoption next year. Next slide, Cole. Within the policies development teams, we had 8 teams. We split out public health and safety as a regional goal because their expertise was very different. And then the dynamic and resilient goal was split into 3 teams for resilience, travel time and reliability, and transportation options or choice. And on the right side of the slide there, you can see all of the various agencies. We had 6 counties, multiple cities, MnDOT and state agencies, nonprofits, and the university was involved as well. Next slide. Within the policies and actions, we really tried to ensure that they were implementable using kind of our 4 key areas through which we can implement. So regional funding priorities, comprehensive planning and project development requirements or guidelines, technical assistance, and then work program items. So those projects or studies that can contribute to our understanding of the need. And next slide.
Yeah, so back to me. One of the things that we look at when we're looking at policies and actions is these spectrums of different types of policies, from regulations, the more like requirement based comp planning or qualifying criteria for the solicitation based approaches, versus incentives or technical assistance. Most of the council's policies and actions land in the technical assistance convening role, with some incentives and some regulations, particularly the incentives through things like the regional solicitation. And so when we look at this, we can look at different approaches to policies and actions, and also maybe applying them to different partners that might be skeptical of the outcome that we're trying to achieve, or if they're strong supporters, they might be more willing to do bolder strategies. And so that's always going to be a factor that we're taking into account. Just to give you a little bit of a preview of what the document looks like, we have the goals and objectives for each topical area up front, with a little bit a blurb introducing the section. And then each policy has both a bolded policy language, and then it has supporting actions that are assigned to different roles across the transportation partners. And so those roles can be either lead agency or support agency, depending on the topic. And then also just noting some tags that we put in there. Ultimately, these could become things like icons, or a way to think about the policies and actions. But the tags that we thought were most relevant to our work were guidance to the regional solicitation evaluation, comprehensive planning guidance, and then work program items, which are items that need further exploration through the TPP's work program. So you can see when you look at this, there'll be a number of actions tagged with RS or CP. And we've already provided this draft working list to Steve Peterson and his team working on the regional solicitation evaluation. So that technical working group that Chair Hager mentioned earlier would start looking at some of that detail as they develop the regional solicitation recommendations, and this would be one of the inputs into that. So I think that while we'd welcome discussion today, I think I'm more putting this up there for you all to consider when you're reviewing the documents, but welcome any feedback that you have today as well. Basically, we're going to go through the new approaches in the 2050 TPP. So we're going to talk about whether there's new approaches that you think are missing, or if they're going in the right direction, or in other areas, existing TPP approaches that you think are maybe outdated or need to be rethought. And so you'll see on the next slide, and Bethany's going to cover this, but the structure for each of our goals is talking about the new approaches, the similar to past approaches, and replaced or removed. And so I'll let Bethany kick it off, and we'll just kind of tag team going back and forth across the goals.
Okay, so we have a set of policies that don't really align under any of the regional goals. So we're calling these policies that guide all work. We do have a policy specific to maintaining our data and plans. So making sure that we are being good stewards of that information that we collect. Proactively planning for competitive discretionary grant programs, making sure the region can be as successful with those pursuits as possible, and then asset management. And this one is slightly different than what we have included in the TPP before, in that we would like to encourage folks to use asset management to advance the regional goals instead of asset management driving the project. You might say, well, we have 5 projects that need to be done, and we're going to prioritize these based on equity, climate, and then their actual condition. And then similar to the past approaches, again, maintaining some of our data through our functional classification work processes, how we apply our regional solicitation funding in those principles of equity and geographic balance. And I think those are the key highlights there. So next slide, Cole.
Can I hold on for a second, Bethany?
Sure.
My question is on geographic balance. Are we talking about that in terms of making sure the money gets spread around geographically, or are we talking about a geographic balance from a system perspective? Like, are we trying to build a geographically balanced system?
We are talking about within the funding programs. And so then defining what that means or how that would be applied would be up to the regional solicitation evaluation process. But that geographic balance is fundamental to the program right now.
Okay.
Okay. So under our region is equitable and inclusive goal, we have a policy that focuses. Oh, Brian, do you have your hand still up?
I'll let you finish and then I'll ask my
Okay.
question.
Okay. We have a new policy that focuses on meeting and going beyond the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements to ensure the region is accessible. We are also implementing strategies against gentrification and displacement. There is a work program item to study repairing freeway harms and impacts and using community assessments to better understand the community that surrounds the transportation projects. Similar to our past approaches, focusing on engaging with and sharing decision makers with community, meeting ADA requirements, and Justice 40, that ensuring benefits and burdens. Now, Brian.
Thank you, Bethany. I appreciate your patience. I got a few questions on these. So when it comes to encouraging projects to go beyond ADA requirements, does that across the board, does that include, say, ABRT projects? Does that include other types of projects? I'm aware that there's a position that my council has taken on ADA as it relates to ABRT projects. And so this has a particular meaning to some of the local partners.
I think Heidi Solberg is our equity and inclusion expert, and I'm not sure if she's on, but what we are trying to encourage everyone to do is, one, to meet the ADA law, right? That's the first step, but then using universal design principles to ensure that the space is inclusive for people beyond those with physical disabilities. So those could be mental, cognitive, children. So creating more inclusive places broadly. And that probably is not the answer to your question.
It's not. I mean, the council's taken a very specific position as regarding ABRT projects and ADA. And so I don't expect you to have the answer, Bethany, but I want somebody at the Met Council to deal with that. What is a very clear contradiction to this statement?
And can I just piggyback on this? And I think we need to define what go beyond actually means, because I'm scratching my head and I don't understand what go beyond means. And I don't understand what implications that would have on funding for agencies that are taking that on, including ongoing O&M.
Yes. So within the document, I think we refer to them as universal design principles, and there is information linked as to what that would be referring to. But yeah, it's hard to distill a 40-page document into a few slides, but I can certainly make that note. We can make sure that we have more information. Are there any other questions on this one?
I'll just note one more thing, and Brian, in response to your question, one of the things that when we presented to the council a couple weeks ago on the same topic was to make it very clear that this is not Metro Transit's policy plan. This is the region's policy plan. So there may be instances in which we're asking Metro Transit to do things differently. And so I think that discussion I know is ongoing between the different agencies, but this is not speaking for Metro Transit. This is speaking for the region's plan. And so I think you're right in acknowledging that there's some issues that still need to be worked out there between the different partners.
Are they not governed by the policy plan?
They are, but they aren't the only one governed by it, right? So this is not saying that Metro Transit has to do this. It's saying the region should be doing this, and each agency then has to take, the direction from the TPP into account.
Yeah. Okay. You got some process to go through, is what you're saying.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So under our communities are healthy and safe, we have, again, kind of split this into two focus areas of transportation safety. So emphasizing a safe systems approach, using context-sensitive design guides rather than the one-size-fits-all, and then forming a regional safety technical working group. We have a policy specific to safety for people outside of vehicles, and then transit safety and security. And then similar to past approaches within transportation safety, that technical assistance and data analysis. And then as the industry has moved away from the 4 E's, so too will this plan. Any questions on the safety policies? Okay, next slide. Within our health objectives, we are focusing on green assets, anti-displacement, air and noise quality. We'll also be doing a work program to define and inventory essential destinations so we can eventually include those within our accessibility analyses, and then placemaking and bringing in those community identities into transportation projects. Any questions on health?
Yeah, I have one there if I could. Sorry, I don't mean to be a frequent flyer, but I just had a few questions here. So when it comes to, when we say placemaking, would that apply to regional solicitation projects so that we could apply federal funds to include those in parts of our projects?
That is a very specific detail, Brian, that I'm not sure, I guess. I think this one is general direction, project development guidance, but we could see some influence within regional solicitation. I think the federal funding restrictions on some of that, those types of project activities would still govern what you could do with that money, but
And I guess, Bethany, maybe it's a higher level question of, do a lot of these policies, are they really more about encouraging applicants to do things through the solicitation on their own, or are we saying that the plan is going to have an influence over regional solicitation and direct funds to be allowable for these things? Because the council has, I'll say, applied some restrictions to the federal funds that are more restrictive than the federal funds are necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's all to be hashed out in the regional solicitation evaluation. I will just clarify though, Brian, it's not the council that applies those, it's TAB and the council together. And so I think that's part of the discussion that needs to be had, through that whole regional solicitation evaluation. But Bethany's right. You still need to be consistent with federal law. There is a lot of flexibility though in, say, like the active transportation funding. And so I think, we can think beyond federal law in some instances.
Well, and to my knowledge, the federal can be used for these things. We've just chosen not to. But
right.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Oh, Joe, your hand just went down. Did you have a comment, Joe?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So Bethany, can you further explain the activate unused transportation right away? What they mean by that, what the group's aiming at there?
yeah, I think there are quite a few examples of what this could be. In some regions around the US, they use the space kind of under their bridges as like greenways, park space. So instead of just having a dead under area, I guess, you could use that. I think, the Minneapolis Farmers Market uses their space for parking during the farmers market under the highway. That's maybe not activated, but, figuring out more flexible uses of those spaces. In addition to that, how we think about greening that spaces for natural resources or kind of some other placemaking activities. So going beyond making it just a utilitarian transportation space, but incorporating more community amenities into those projects.
Okay, 10-4, thanks.
Anyone else for this slide?
I guess I just had a general question. This is Michael Thompson, city opponent. So how do like ongoing operations relate to this policy work? So let's say like ABRT or light rail, there's a lot of talking about healthy and safe communities, air quality, noise, light, pollution. So are we talking more project level, or what about operations? And the reason I'm bringing this up, not to just throw a wrench in here, but I was at the Capitol this week and walked by the light rail station right at the Capitol. And you could probably pick up 100 bags of trash. I mean, it was just disgusting. And I'm just thinking, huge investments, but the ongoing operation, how do these goals relate? Because I mean, there's so much to do now with the infrastructure we have, and we're talking about these aspirational things, but there's things right in front of our face that we're not doing a good job with. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I don't know if anybody can put some context to that question.
That is a great question, Michael. I will say that I'm going to ignore the trash comment and say that there is research that shows that when you activate and bring in community art and those kind of softer features, that you do achieve some sort of behavior change. It's certainly not going to be enough to get us to where we would like to be, and that's why there are other strategies. But I think that's within some of our policies and actions, we do encourage, material selection to minimize vandalism and kind of ease of maintenance type things. So we do have some operational actions in here, but I think when you review the documents, that certainly would be areas where we could incorporate more feedback, because these are policies, so they need some massaging for how we would actually implement them.
Charles, did you have?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I might, just to note Michael's comment on trash, I don't see Metro Transit's TAC rep here today, but I happened to be at the Metro Transit senior management meeting on Monday morning, and they were reviewing their rider survey information and kind of how customers feel about different aspects of the system and overall satisfaction and things like that. One of the things that stood out was that folks would feel safer at stations with a greater degree of trash removal and cleaning. So that's, I think, something that's noted there, and certainly there's a connection, but how it relates to these policies, maybe it becomes about making sure that operations are adequately funded and that staffing and kind of the workforce development and retention activities are sufficient to ensure staffing for these investments, to keep them in a state of good repair, not just on a long-term basis, but on a daily basis as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you both for that feedback.
Yeah, and Michael, when you're reviewing the document, I might just note that one of the things we tried to shy away from is just saying things that are policies and actions that everyone's doing. So we're not saying people are going to plow their streets, because everyone, for the most part, is doing that. But if there is an area where we're not doing enough today, maybe that's an area to acknowledge where we need a policy and action. So I think you'll see that when you read the more detail. But I think keep that in your mind when you're looking and making comments. I think it's a good area to explore, these areas where maybe we're not doing enough today.
Yeah, well, on some of our federal grant awards, I mean, we have to commit to plowing,
right?
And so it just seems like such a low-hanging fruit here for the community, and kind of the no broken windows approach. Once you let things go a little bit, then that kind of encourages crime, and like nobody's taking care of the station. And so it's just food for thought. I don't want to get too far into the discussion here, but I just thought I would mention that. So that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I'll go to the next slide, Bethany. Assuming it's still, it's me. Okay. So, yeah, so as Bethany noted, we have dynamic and resilient goal, and we split it up into a couple of different teams. So on this particular slide, we're talking about reliability and resilience objectives. And so we have a number of new approaches, particularly in the resilience space. You might all be surprised to know that the 2040 TPP didn't speak a whole lot to climate change impact mitigation. At the time, it wasn't as high a profile of an issue, so we've added some additional actions there. We've also tweaked our highway reliability focus to corridors with the highest level of delay and travel time issues. There's some specific thresholds that are in the actions there. And then for freight, really focusing on incorporating some of the new work coming out of the e-commerce study, some of the new data, micro hubs, the idea of freight micro hubs becoming a new topic, not just in this region, but nationwide, and then issues with capacity for truck parking. So all new topics for the policies and actions there. A lot of similar approaches to past plans in terms of our vision for highway investment and transit advantages, and also for using some freight prioritization tools. The only two areas that we removed here were, and it's not really removed, it's kind of refocused, is those policies that could be perceived as open-ended, non-strategic highway mobility. We've got some criticism in the past that our plan kind of supports basically uncontrolled highway expansion. So we wanted to clarify and focus our policies there. And then preserving right of way for future projects that still can occur, but it's been less of a focus since the focus is less on expanding the regional system and moving forward. For choice objectives, this is about expanding options for people. We have a number of new approaches in areas like complete streets, including focus on speed management and traffic calming, as well as complete streets typology work program item. Again, another topic you might be surprised to know is not covered much in the TPP is mobility as a service and mobility hubs and current management plans. I mean, they seem like topics that are very well discussed in our sphere today, but 10 years ago they weren't. So those are much more expanded discussions in our policies and actions. We also have incorporated a lot of the recommendations from the TPP, or sorry, from the travel demand management study, and expanded our discussion of travel demand management in the policies and actions. There's a micro policy framework work program item, so that's something that just we acknowledge we need to develop so that there's some more guidance around micro policy in the region, and then some more discussion on how to handle pedestrian planning and comprehensive plans, as well as a sidewalk inventory. We have a number of approaches that are sticking around here. You know, our focus on transit investment and bike and ped investment and all the tools we use there are sticking around, as well as that year-round maintenance. We did remove passenger rail policies that were in the TPP connections across the state because we feel like those are more appropriately addressed in MnDOT's passenger rail plan. And so we didn't want to try to duplicate or be conflicting with that. So we just decided to allow those to continue to exist there. Bethany, is this back to you?
Yes. So under the addressing climate change goal, we are primarily all new in this TPP with a focus on electric vehicle charging for both private and shared vehicles, and a focus on multi-unit, historically disadvantaged and rural areas, as well as resource sharing and technical assistance. Evaluate greenhouse gas emissions, as we just heard about this morning, and then vehicle mile traveled reduction. So focusing on educational materials, access to bike systems, and then just further research into those methods, projects, and programs. Next slide. Protect and restore natural systems. The previous TPP really focused on just aligning and supporting the required processes that govern transportation investments to some slightly more proactive policies around impervious surfaces, so plans, programs, and processes to minimize and reduce that impervious pavement across the region, and then incorporating in natural features when possible through native plantings, green stormwater, and habitat reconnection. And I think that was the last one.
So I'll just close again with this slide and noting that you're going to see this detailed 30-page document. It'll be more than just the bullets you saw today. It's quite a bit more detail. On March 20th, we'll be sharing that with TAB, Met Council, and TAC members. And again, just emphasizing that we expect you all as TAC members to spend more time on policies and actions than, say, the policymakers. So take that direction with maybe, or guidance with how you spend your time or allocate your time. We do have more content potentially to share in May. We'll plan to share the finance and investment plans with TAC members in April, and then maybe more content in May. And I think while TAB and TAC have very full agendas, that if there is a topic that comes up that warrants more discussion, that we can try to reserve some time in those agendas before the TPP starts moving through release for public comment in June at TAC planning. And so we still have a few months to work through any maybe bigger question areas that emerge as you're reviewing these documents. So the sooner we hear about them, the more we can agenda plan around potential discussion items.
So Cole, just a process question. So this is gonna come out on March 20th. TAC members can review, and how do you want comments back?
Yeah, we don't have Jed here today, but we for TAB and Net Council members, we're going to email them a document directly, and they have to individually respond, and that's because we don't want to create an open meeting around this. So individually, they'll send us comments. For TAC, we could do a similar approach to the technical working group where we do a shared document that you can all comment on online collectively. And so I think we'd be open to either, and I'll talk with Jed about what our options are there. But if you guys have preferences, we can take comments however makes sense for you. If you want to individually email us a document back, but I think we'll try to make it as streamlined as possible. And then if folks need exceptions, I think we'd be open to that. I think a few of the technical working group members have had a different approach, but.
Okay, and then a comment log essentially gets created so members can see how their comment was or was not addressed and why.
We are not doing that for this round. This is more of an informal comment process. So we're taking this feedback to help shape the draft. That more detailed comment log would come with the public comment response. But if you did submit a comment and you want to chat about, how we're approaching it, then we would welcome that. And we are tracking changes that we're making in response to these comments and the documents so that you'll see what changed from the first version that you saw.
Okay, so that will be sent back after the edits are made to the both or all three groups.
Yeah, I think we should talk about whether we share that with TAB and Met Council, but we can certainly share it with TAC. I think you guys would be more able to understand what we're sharing.
Okay. Do TAC members have any questions or preference on how to submit comments on this? Okay, so then, Cole, I'm not seeing anyone, so maybe I would leave it to you all to use your best professional judgment and just make it clear to us how we are submitting those comments. Thank you for the presentation today. It's helpful. I know it's been a lot to track all of this work that's going on, so I think these updates are much appreciated by the group. Last opportunity for any questions or comments from the group. Otherwise, I will see if committee members have anything they want to bring up before we are adjourned today.
Just wanted to thank Bethany for the presentation and her patience with me.
You can ask questions anytime, Brian.
I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Cole and Bethany. I see Steve has his hand up. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I'm waiting for other business. I'll wait till you get there.
Okay. Well, I think we are there at other business, so go ahead, Steve.
We're there. Yeah, maybe just a couple quick notes on the regional solicitation and different happenings there. First, wanted to note that this Friday, 12 to 2, we're having our second active transportation working group meeting. I think valuable technical feedback came the first round, and in fact, they requested that Chair Hager present on federalization. I think is the topic, right? And what it means to add federal dollars or not to projects. So she'll be doing that here on Friday. And so just want to note that we're still putting together a few of the other committees, the technical and policy committees. I know many of you have volunteered for that technical committee, that is. And we did talk to TAC executive about those, what those groups may look like, and still putting that together. As far as the ongoing regional solicitation, thanks again to all the people that helped on the scoring and people who are on those committees. Starting to see kind of draft scores kind of go back for kind of one last double check here this week. And so we do anticipate that those will probably be out by the end of the week, hopefully. Just doing some QA QC on those. So applicants can look for that. It's always exciting to see kind of the draft rankings. And then of course, at the March Funding and Programming Committee, those applicants will have an opportunity to appeal any scores that are major mistakes, I'll call them, that occurred in the scoring or something got missed or transposed a number or something like that. So that's quick update for you. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Anyone else under other business today? If not, unless there are any objections, then we will adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Have a great month.
Yep.
Thank
have a
you.
good day.